Warning, incoming goblin. Warning, incoming game. You get it, it's a reboot reference.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game features Kevin, Maximus, Mika, and Mackenzie. Kevin is delving into some dungeons with Zalto, keeping Dungeon Descent, Mountain, Inventor's Fair, Mask of Avacyn, Gearport Aethergrid, Seething Song, and Defiler of Instinct. Maximus is playing his Sivitri deck, keeping Ethereum Sculptor, Ivory Tower, Demonic Tutor, Treasure Map, Bajuka Bog, Clearwater Pathway, and an Island. Mika's looking for treasures and clues with Tivit, keeping 2 Swamps, 2 Plains, Utter End, Terramorphic Expanse, and Marnius Calgar. And last but not least, Mackenzie has brought out his Torsten deck, keeping Ephemerate, 2 Forests, Captain of the Watch, a Plains, Gavany Township, and Esper Sentinel. Kevin wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a Dungeon Descent. Max plays an Island and casts Ivory Tower. Mika plays Terramorphic Expanse, passing. Mackenzie's got a Plains and casts Esper Sentinel. Kevin draws and plays a Mountain, and Mika cracks his Terramorphic Expanse to find an Island. Kevin then casts a Mask of Avacyn, not paying the one for the Sentinel, and Mackenzie draws. Maximus gains 2 from Ivory Tower and draws for turn. He plays a Swamp and then casts an Ethereum Sculptor. Mika's just got a Swamp and passes. Mackenzie draws, playing a Forest, and then goes to combat. He pokes Kevin for 1 and passes after that. Kevin has an Inventor's Fair for turn, and he has enough mana for a Nettle Cyst, but once more doesn't pay the 1 and Mackenzie draws a card. Maximus gains 1 from the Ivory Tower and draws. He plays a Clearwater Pathway and then casts Treasure Map, not paying for the Esper Sentinel trigger as he tries to make a friend with Mackenzie. Going to combat, Maximus pokes Mika for 1 and passes after that. Mika draws and plays a Plains and passes. Mackenzie has a Gavany Township for turn and casts a Siege Veteran. Moving to combat, he puts a +1/+1 counter onto the Sentinels, and then swings the Sentinel at Max, dealing 2, rejecting Maximus' friendship. Maximus takes it, and after that, Mackenzie passes. Kevin draws and plays a Mountain. He plays out Defiler of Instinct and passes, with Maximus activating the Treasure Map during his end step to scry 1. Max draws and plays a Myriad Landscape, which comes in tapped. He goes to combat, poking Mika for another 1 and passing. Mika is off to a slow start, just playing a Plains and passing. Mackenzie draws and plays a Forest. He then plays Preeminent Captain and moves to combat. Once more he pumps up the Esper Sentinel thanks to the Siege Veteran, and then swings it at Maximus. Maximus responds, scrying 1 with the Treasure Map, and then takes the hit. Kevin's got a Fiend Lash, paying 2 life off the Defiler of Instinct for 1 of its red mana sources. Kevin then deals 1 to the Esper Sentinel thanks to the Defiler. He then casts Seething Song, making 5 red mana. He uses it and a combination of the Defiler to help cast a Tectonic Giant, and then a Gearport Aethergrid. He gets 2 more triggers from the Defiler and takes out the Esper Sentinel. Kevin then swings the Nettle Cyst at Maximus and the Defiler at Mackenzie. Mackenzie blocks the Soldier token that he made from the Esper Sentinel dying, while Maximus takes the hit. Max draws and plays a Bajuka Bog, exiling Mackenzie's graveyard as it comes in. He then passes, and during his end step, Mika casts Utter End, exiling the Defiler of Instinct. Mika draws and plays a Swamp. He casts Marnius Calgar and just passes after that. Mackenzie's got a Forest for turn, and casts Nature's Lore to find another Forest, and then goes to combat. He puts a +1/+1 counter onto the Preeminent Captain, and swings it at Maximus, putting a Captain of the Watch into play from its on-attack trigger, which he has swinging at Kevin. Neither of them block, and both take the hits, and Mackenzie passes. Kevin draws and goes to combat, with Maximus cracking the mirrored landscape in response to moving the phases. Kevin swings the Tectonic Giant at Maximus, and picks the mode to exile some cards, exiling 2 mountains off his trigger, and then choosing to play one later on. Max takes the hit, and in his post-combat main phase, Kevin plays the mountain and a Swiftfoot Boots. He then equips the Mask of Avacyn to the Germ token, aka Jeremy, and on his end step, Maximus activates the treasure map again and puts the final counter onto it to flip it. Maximus draws and plays a Darksteel Citadel. He then plays Sivitri and down takes her to tutor up Shimmer Dragon. He then casts his Shimmer Dragon and passes. Mika draws and plays a Plains. He plays Tivit and gets to vote for both a treasure and a clue, while everyone else just votes for a clue. With nothing else, Mika passes. Mackenzie draws and plays a Plains. He then brings out Torsten and reveals his top 7, putting a total of 5 cards into his hand. Mackenzie then moves to combat and swings a Preeminent Captain at Mika, putting a King Darien into play off its trigger, and has that swinging at Sivitri. Mika declares no blocks, and Max blocks King Darien with his Shimmer Dragon. Darien dies and makes a soldier token, and with nothing else, Mackenzie passes. Kevin draws and goes to combat. He swings the Tectonic Giant at Mackenzie, who blocks the freshly made soldier token. Kevin has the Giant's trigger exiling his top 2, and he picks Basilisk Collar, which he then casts in his post-combat main phase, along with a Liquid Metal Torque. He then wraps things up with a Spikefield Cave as his land for turn, and passes. During his end step, Maximus draws a card off the Shimmer Dragon by tapping 2 artifacts. Maximus gains a life from the Ivory Tower, and draws. He plays Cranial Plating, and then casts Teferi's Ageless Insight. He then upticks Sivitri, and passes to Mika. Mika draws and goes to combat. He swings Tivit at Mackenzie, who can't block the flyer, and Mika gets to vote, going up to a total of 4 treasures and 6 clues after everyone's done. He also draws a card from Arnia's Calgar, and after that, plays out Tamio's Journal. He's not done, playing an Evolving Wilds and passing. Mackenzie draws and plays Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. He then activates the Gavany Township to put a +1/+1 counter onto each creature he controls, and he goes to combat. He gets to resolve his trigger from the Siege Veteran and puts another +1/+1 counter onto the Preeminent Captain. Mackenzie then swings Torsten at Sivitri, paying the 2 life tax, and the Preeminent Captain at Kevin, putting a Rocks Pikemaster into play, which is attacking Mika. Mika blocks with Marnius, Maximus blocks with the Ethereum Sculptor, and Kevin blocks with Jeremy the Germ. Before damage though, Maximus taps the Ethereum Sculptor and Ivory Tower, drawing 2 cards, and then casts a Cyclonic Rift, but not overloaded, to just bounce Torsten. Mackenzie responds by flickering Torsten with an Ephemerate, and gets to reveal his top 7 again. This time he gets 4 cards off the trigger, and gets to make 2 soldier tokens from his other creatures dying, and they then move to damage, with 2 of his creatures dying, and he makes 2 soldier tokens. In his post-combat main phase, he plays a Dryad Militant, and passes. Kevin also gets in on the action by tapping some artifacts to ping Mackenzie for 2, and pings Mika for 1. Kevin draws and plays Zalto, with Maximus responding by drawing 2 cards of the Shimmer Dragon. Kevin then equips Zalto with the boots, and Mika responds by casting Void Rend and targets Zalto. Kevin responds by pinging Zalto 3 times with the Aether Grid, and ventures into the dungeon of the Mad Mage 3 times. Zalto then dies, and with nothing else, Kevin passes. Maximus gains 3, and he plays an island, and casts Sword of the Animist. He equips the sword onto the Ethereum Sculptor, and goes to combat. He swings the Sculptor at Kevin, getting a land into play tapped upon attacking, and Kevin takes the hit. After combat, Max plays a Blade of Shared Souls, and Mika cracks the Evolving Wilds in response in the meantime. The blade makes it a token copy of the Ethereum Sculptor, and Max is then able to play a free Swiftfoot Boots. Max then passes, and during his end step, Mika cracks 3 clues to tutor with Tamio's journal before moving to his turn. Mika draws and plays a Memorial to Glory. He then goes to combat, swinging Tivit at Kevin and getting more treasures and some clue tokens, plus drawing a card from Marnia's Calgar's trigger. Mika then cracks his 6 treasures to help cast Exterminatus, destroying all non-land permanents. He holds priority though, and tutors once more with Tamio's journal in response, which has Max responding by drawing 6 cards to the Shimmer Dragon. The board then gets wiped, with Mackenzie making 10 soldier tokens from Torsten and his siege veteran. Mika also gets to put Tivit into the graveyard, and then plays a Sister Hospitaller to bring him back and gain 6 life. He then gets 4 clues and 1 treasure token after all the votes, and passes. Mackenzie draws and activates Gavany Township to pump his team. He then plays Mural and goes to combat. He swings the soldier tokens at Mika, who eats 2 of them but still takes 16. Mackenzie passes after that. Kevin draws but is short on lands and has to pass. Maximus draws and plays an island. He then plays Emery, milling 4. He follows up with a Scaretiller and passes. During his end step, Mika casts Swords to Plowshares and exiles Muriel. Mika draws and plays a Port Town which comes in tapped. Going to combat, he swings Tivit at Mackenzie, and after the votes, gets to make some treasures and some clues. He then kicks an Everflowing Chalice, putting 4 counters onto it, and then follows up with Celestine, the Living Saint, and passes to Mackenzie. Mackenzie draws and plays a Temple of Plenty, scrying 1 and bottoming it. He then activates Gavany Township again to pump his team even further, and then plays out Dauntless Escort. Going to combat, he swings 4 soldiers at Maximus, who blocks one with a Scaretiller but still takes 9. After that, Mackenzie passes. Kevin draws and plays a Valakut Exploration, and then plays a Mountain. This has him exiling a Mana Geyser from the Valakut Exploration, but he can't cast it sadly. Kevin then passes, with the Mana Geyser going into his graveyard, and dealing 1 to each opponent. Meanwhile, Max flashes in a Research Thief, and moves to his turn. Maximus draws, and plays Reliquary Tower. He then casts Demonic Tutor. He goes to find a card, and casts a Mycothin's Lattice, and then activates Emery to help cast an Empowered Auto-Generator from the graveyard. Moving to combat, Maximus swings the Scaretiller at Mackenzie, putting a Swamp into play from its trigger, and Mackenzie graciously takes the 1. This has Maximus drawing a card from the Research Thief, and he passes after that. Mika draws and plays a Plains. Going to combat, he swings Tivit at Kevin and Celestine at Max, and they both take the hits. This has Mika getting to vote again with Tivit, and he ends up with more treasures and clues, and he follows up by casting Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Mika then upticks Teferi to draw, and casts a Reaver Titan. Mika then finishes things up with an Arcane Signet, and then untaps 2 lands on his end step thanks to the delayed Teferi trigger. Mackenzie draws and uses the Township again to add some power to his team. Moving to combat, he swings 4 soldiers and the Dauntless Escort at Maximus, and 4 soldiers at Mika. Mika cracks a clue, and then cracks a Memorial Glory to make more soldier tokens. Mika then chumps 2 of the soldiers, who are significantly smaller, while Maximus blocks the Dauntless Escort. The rest go through, and after that, Mackenzie casts a Goreclaw and passes. Kevin draws and casts Chaos Warp, targeting his own Dungeon Descent. He flips into a Buried Ruin, and the Valakut Awakening exiles a Starstorm. Kevin doesn't play it though, and instead lets it go to his graveyard, dealing 1 to everyone, and then passing. Maximus draws and plays a Vault of Whisper. He then recasts Cranial Plating with Emery, and equips it onto the Scaretiller. Going to combat, he swings the Scaretiller at Mika, getting a Myriad Landscape out of his graveyard, and after it connects, takes Mika out of the game. After combat, Maximus plays a Joyrus familiar, and then gets to enjoy a free expedition map, thanks to its reduction. He then replays Sivitri as well, and upticks her once it's out, and passes. Mackenzie draws and once more activates good old Gavany Township. Going to combat, he swings his soldier tokens at Kevin, and Goreclaw and the Dauntless Escort at Maximus. Max attempts to move Cranial Plating to the Joyrus familiar to at least go down swinging, but Mackenzie even has a path to exile to stop him, and wins the game through combat. Game review time. So I think Mika's game pretty much exemplified why you need to have some kind of accelerant or at least some kind of draw. He spent the first 4 and 5 turns basically doing nothing, which is not enough to get you there in a game, even when you're rocking a commander that is as powerful as Tivit. Kevin was also very frustrated with his Zalto deck, and Dungeon Descent being only a sorcery activation is kinda strange. He really wasn't sure why Mika used the Voidrand on Zalto, but to be fair, sometimes Zalto does go off pretty hard, and in the past he's blitzed through some dungeons several times in one turn just from spells alone. This was the first time we'd seen Mackenzie's Torsten deck, and it was pretty sweet. A 7-mana commander has to do a lot, and Mika basically refilled his hands, or at least got 9 cards in this case, which is fantastic. It was very much built around soldiers, and Gavany Township I think was the MVP of this game. I think Maximus was actually holding him back thanks to Sivitri's plus, because Mackenzie didn't want to take 2 life per attacker going at him. Beyond that, his deck just seems like a really sweet synergistic artifact-based deck, with a lot of fun cards like Shimmer Dragon and the Lattice working so well in tandem and allowing him to draw so many cards per turn. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Multizone, Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.